You're listening to ayahuascapodcast.com.
The entheogens, the psychedelics, and it's also to remind people that psyche, even that word psyche, can mean soul or something that's indefinable, that's like that life force, the thing that is inhabiting us, right? Expanding that and bringing that forward. The plant sacraments, the fungal sacraments, they help this deaf man hear. It may be that taking saunas or meditating in India, all of these things may also help us find that experience of the divine. For me, having sat many 10-day meditation retreats and taken all kinds of various forms of Temescal, I'm so thankful that the psychedelic plant sacraments exist, because I don't think I would be able to hear without them. So to me, they're required for my practice to be able to receive the benefits of divine presence.
And
In this episode of Ayahuasca Podcast, I interview Bob Otis, the founding pastor of Sacred Garden Community Church and one of the founders of the Decriminalize Nature movement. Enjoy this episode. This episode is sponsored by La Huayra Ayahuasca Retreat. At La Huayra, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. La Huayra, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you. Hi, guys, and welcome to Ayahuasca Podcast. As always, with you, the host, Sam Believ. Today, I'm interviewing Bob Otis. Bob is the founding pastor of Sacred Garden Community Church and a leading advocate for the decriminalization of sacred plant medicines. He's deeply involved in psychedelic spirituality and serves on Chakrula Council for the protection of sacred plants, working towards ethical and sustainable practices in plant medicines. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Yeah.
Bob, before we begin diving deep, can you tell us a little bit about your story, your life story, and how it brought you to work with plant medicines?
Yeah. And actually, you had talked about that bio, and I will give a little, just because of I want to be in integrity. I had been really grateful to be a part of that Chakruna Council, and then moved to co-founding with others, the Sacred Plant Alliance. I'm no longer on that Chakruna Council. And Sam, thank you for letting me clarify that. I could have got that earlier. Yeah. So really have appreciated Chakruna, but want to be in integrity about that relationship. Yeah. You were asking kind of about background, and it's interesting. And actually, having just been talking about Chakruna, it makes an interesting lead in, because there are different ways, I think, into what I'll call the entheogenic awakening, the psychedelic awakening, this sort of time that we're in. And a lot of people will move into this space through having heard about ayahuasca. This is called Ayahuasca Podcast. And people have learned that you can go down to locations, maybe in Colombia or Peru or Brazil or Bolivia, and access these, what you call medicines or sacred medicines, what I call sacraments from my culture and tradition. And so there's a really kind of a path that has become very wide and well trod over the past, I'll say 5 years or 10 years into the South, and receiving ayahuasca or maybe wachuma and others. Whereas my background and heritage is really much more global, and I would call it even modern or postmodern. In fact, probably even transmodern or metamodern. And so my first really deep and meaningful experience that has guided my life to this day was over 40 years ago, sitting on the side of the Smoky Mountains in East Tennessee, where my family had been for 9 generations. So in some sense, I really feel a deep connection to that space. We have lived in the land with property even inside the Smoky Mountains Park for a long time. So I just felt really connected to that place. And even with all of its history, Cherokee, Tennessee was very near where that was. So just thinking about the indigenous peoples that have been there and are still in that area, it's just a rich conversation. But anyway, sitting up there in the Smokies with LSD, a European sacrament, really, that's came from Albert Hoffman. and was with a group of really trusted friends. And we were sort of truth and infinity oriented, trying to understand. This was in my teens. I'm so thankful to have been with a group that was seeking to deepen rather than only to recreate. We were also happy to be together and enjoying ourselves, but really kind of seeking truth or knowledge or wisdom, whatever that may be. And just had a moment with a relatively high dose of LSD where I was sitting apart from the group, and it was as if one of those mystical experiences that you'll hear about that these sacraments can open, where it was, and I could start crying telling the story. I probably won't today, but it was as if time stopped and the entire universe became solid light, and my body dissolved, and my sense of self extended outward into, it felt like maybe all things and all time. And it was just a really profound experience, also as if consciousness were in all things, and as if all things were known and loved and held in love. In a sense forgiven, but deeper than that word, so it was just a really profound experience that was really healing. And I couldn't even put any words. Even those words I just put on have taken me 20, 30, 40 years just to start putting words into that experience. But it also was guiding me to learn more. I went to my own father, who was a medical doctor, and I was thankfully able to trust. I'd seen some books by folks like Charles Tart and John Lilly in his library, these sort of Western early psychedelic aficionados. So I felt safe talking to him, and he said, let's go to the library and check out all the books. And so I found Psychedelics Encyclopedia and, some of these down at the Oak Ridge Public Library. And that just started a lifetime of study, leading me to receive psychology degrees and religious study degrees and an MDiv and studying with Wendy Doniger at University of Chicago, who was a global sacred plant expert. So those profound, deeply meaningful experiences that these entheogens can bring can really impact our lives, and I think sent me in a direction that helped me grow closer to my family, helped me grow closer to meaning, I think, in this life, and have led me to here. There's one little story. Hope that was useful. Yeah.
Very useful. Thank you so much for sharing. Religion is something that I'm planning to talk about on this episode. And you mentioned LSD, right? And there's some good way to explain the relationship between ergot and kukion, and Greek religions, and maybe even early Christianity. I think you probably would know a lot about that. So what have you found in that direction as in connection between psychedelics and religion?
It's so interesting. And also I'm hearing a little bit of around sort of a Western religions, that you mentioned, Greece and Christianity and some of these. And this is such a rich, I won't say story, because I think there are stories, there are such rich stories associated with this. And the first one, which I'll share with a little bit of grief, is my sense is that, the indigenous plant practices of the European continent, which still exist in some areas, like in Finland with the Sami peoples and the Laplanders in the far north, and Tungus all the way out in Siberia. There are these still living indigenous traditions of what someone might call the global north. But Europe really, I think in many ways, was the first of the humans around the globe where something that we might call modernity pushed all that down. Where we were somehow, it's like the indigenous, I'll say, religions or the indigenous sacred practices of meaning, which were present, and we could talk about some of those. You mentioned, the Kikeon and Eleusis, and they're really interesting quotes from Shakespeare, where he mentions different. He even mentions toad in a really interesting way. There's the bufo in Europe, and that bufotenine can have an effect. So there are a lot of indications. Authors like Carl Rook and Brian Rurerescu and Jonathan Ott and many others have written about that we lost. This wasn't only European, also even in the Middle East and even in the Far East, there seemed to be something that was happening, starting as far back as maybe 1,500 years ago, and then accelerating all the way up until recent times, where we were learning to see objects, we were creating science, we were getting this like subject-object distinction really clear and becoming empirical. All of this was happening. And I think that's very strong magic that science is bringing. And so I feel that there was probably a lot that was really compelling. I'm just trying to understand the story. And then as a part of that, the indigenous plant practices were considered to be like superstitious or witchcraft or harmful. They weren't in alignment with the sort of sky god religions of Christianity or Judaism or Islam, or some of those. And so something happened starting probably 1,500 years ago, but then we can talk about different times. There are inquisitions and even in the last 50, 75 years in the United States where we've had the drug laws, right? So my personal feeling is the Irish islands where I came from, the areas of Greek, the European mainland, they were all holding indigenous sacred plant practices. For me, that I will call that religious or religion. And we're speaking from the languages of our culture, Sam. You may be thinking more from I don't want to be projecting to you, but for example, just to use examples, you may be coming from more of a Colombian culture where you think about plant medicine and things like Pachamama, and it's more of almost like a cultural healing, self-healing, medicinal type of practice. Again, don't let me. I'm projecting. It may not be accurate, but for example, there are these different ways people will look. Whereas for me, I am coming out of a Western background. That's my family heritage. On my dad's side of the family, there were 2 medical doctors and 2 pastors and a nurse who married a pastor, right? So this is my culture and my language that I'm coming out of. So for me, the experience that the sacraments brought were of what I might call divine presence, right? Or divinity. I'm not so comfortable with the word God because there's a lot of other cultural baggage that I may not agree with, but it might have been as if God were present, with that sacramental experience. Certainly what I would call the divine, but what it means to you may be different. For me, that may be that spirit of universal love. For someone else, it may be the spirit of Christ. For someone else, it may be Mother Aya coming and guiding them. Like, it seems like this experience may be different based on our culture. For me personally, it's a profoundly religious experience. Coming from, for example, this Western philosopher, William James, who talks about religion as those experiences, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, the attitudes, experiences, sentiments that each of us in our own heart hold in our sincere relationship to that, whatever that is that we might consider divine, right? This is William James' definition of religion. That the sentiments, the experiences, the practices that each of us carry in our heart in relationship to whatever we might consider divine. And to me, the sacraments participate in that. The plant sacraments, the sacraments of our church, whether that may be the combination of DMT and MAOI that opens up that opens the way to the divine, or whether or not that may be coming from MDMA, which is helping remove those things that are blocking us from the divine, or whether or not that may be the psilocybin mushrooms, which can bring us into a state of presence with that which I'm calling divine. And for me, that's really the definition of a sacrament, that the thing that is connected to and connecting us to that experience of the divine or to the divine. That's the way I would define a sacrament. And the sacramental practice is religious. And so that's a little background there. Hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I actually come from Latvia originally, which is in Eastern Europe. And even though I've been in Colombia for 8 years and most of my spirituality got developed here, I did have luck to participate in a very paganistic sort of ritual in Latvia it was a sauna ritual. It's something similar to Temazcal, way before I even know what Temazcal was. And in that part, they work with plants a lot. Like they would use masculine trees for masculine, feminine trees for feminine. There's like series of saunas and cold dipping to such an extent that I think it resulted in one of my very first psychedelic experiences, so to say. I remember my consciousness sort of shrinking and kind of becoming dissolved. But in those forests in Latvia, all over the place, and Latvia was the last pagan place in Europe. Historically, they were only Christianized very late. But you see those red cap mushrooms everywhere, and also I have access to Russian culture because I'm a Russian speaker as well. And all the fairy tales, they have to do with mushrooms and all kinds of, suspiciously very psychedelic looking and sounding creatures and stories. So I kind of understand what you mean by that. But the story seems to be that religion was started from psychedelics or from those sacraments, then including the cult of Dionysus that then kind of grew into Christianity. And then somewhere along the line, we lost that connection to such an extent that religions became against the psychedelics. And now with the work like you're doing, where obviously you have a church with psychedelics, it's kind of bringing that connection back together. So let's talk a little bit about that. Your very unique path to work with plant medicines or sacred medicines or sacraments, as you like to call them, on which I do agree. I do agree that plant medicines are sacraments. How and why did you start a church? And, because it's a very different route to take. Tell us more about that.
Right. Oh, and I was really enjoying that discussion about your experience in Latvia. Thanks for sharing that. That's interesting. Yeah. And it also opens up the question about what may be a sacrament, right? And for me, sometimes within this community, and I'll answer your question, but just to go back to your last comment, for me, the entheogens, the psychedelics, and it's also to remind people that psyche, even that word psyche, can mean soul or something that's indefinable, that's like that life force, the thing that is inhabiting us, right? Expanding that and bringing that forward. For me, the plant sacraments, the fungal sacraments, they help this deaf man hear. It may be that taking saunas or meditating in India, all of these things may also help us find that experience of the divine. For me, having sat many 10-day meditation retreats and taken all kinds of various forms of temescal, I'm so thankful that the psychedelic plant sacraments exist, because I don't think I would be able to hear without them. So to me, they're required for my practice to be able to receive the benefits of divine presence. After more than 50 years of seeking, these have been the sacraments that open the way, right? So that to me is required for my sincere religious practice, which is part of what helps define our church, right? What do we require for our practice? So just to answer your question directly, it's interesting because I had this initial really profound, overwhelming mystical experience when I was 17. And then I had a few other experiences over my life, kind of leading in that direction. And though they were guiding me, I feel, at really deep levels, like subconscious or even unconscious guidance being received, as well as conscious guidance. I didn't know why I felt so compelled to study psychology and religious studies and sociology and to receive a master's of divinity. I just felt that those experiences were guiding me to ask these questions, and I had to go in those places to answer them, right? Or to at least learn more. I wouldn't say answer, but to grow more depth and language in the space. So I had spent 35 or more years after having some initial deep experiences, preparing myself to found a church, really. But I didn't realize it. I was like, why am I doing this? My parents, bless them, were so loving. They're like, Bob, we want to support you. It was a lot of privilege for me that my parents would morally and ethically support me doing all these strange studies that weren't really career oriented. You know what I mean? That's just like psychology and religious studies and studying plant, going down to Palenque with my dad and learning from Terrence McKenna and Sasha Shulgin. And, it's like, that wasn't really a career move exactly, right? But I just felt a deep, compelling need, like a calling, I guess you might say, that was coming out of those experiences. I started growing my own mushrooms when I was 18, right? Because I also felt a strong calling that the sacraments were so important to me and my community. This was when this concept of community started coming into my head as a teenager. I was like, these sacraments are important to me and my tribe, my community. We need them. I need to be able to go to earth and sun and receive the sacrament. I don't want to depend on all this market economy and dealers. It needs to be between me and earth and soil and sun and water and sacrament. I just felt that calling, which may have been a re-indigenizing energy. I'm not sure, but it was like, Bob, the sacraments are asking you to connect to the soil and the seed. And so now we have a garden, right? I have a sacred garden. And so having been living in this location in Oakland with a big parking lot and a big warehouse, and we took the concrete out of a lot of the parking lot. I like to say we unpaved the parking lot and we invited paradise to come back in. There's a song about paving the parking lot and paved paradise and put up a parking lot. And we're doing the opposite here. We're like taking out the parking lot and bringing paradise back into the heart of Oakland, downtown Oakland where I live. So there's a beautiful sacred plant garden here. I had a long practice with sort of ranging between 3 and 10 people, like my close friends, But like at the time in the 90s and zeros, you had to be sort of a really careful underground psychedelic aficionado if you're going to be practicing. It wasn't popular. You couldn't, at the time, there weren't, these paths down to South America weren't well trodden, right? They weren't easy to find. And so I had my group of, we called ourselves the Yogi Team, Bay Area Practical Satsang. We had all kinds of funny names for our groups, right? Satsang Unity Project. We'd get together and enjoy sacraments and move into divine presence. But then suddenly around 2017, everything started to change. I think maybe Michael Pollan's book, but there was like a sea change in culture. There's something was happening around 2015, 2016, 17. And the little group that I had been sort of the informal leader of was really expanding. People would kind of bring my partner, my cousin, my friend, Bob, these gatherings out here at Tranquility Base are really wonderful. Can we have more ceremonies, larger ceremonies? So we were starting to have 3-4 ceremonies a month, 15, 20, 25 people ceremonies. This back 2015, 16, 17, right? And that was just mostly I were leading those ceremonies. I would have sober sitters come in, folks from mycological groups and things. But everything was changing, Sam. That they weren't experienced aficionados, right, who had been studying meditation all their lives. They were people seeking healing, people who were alienated, seeking connection, seeking to grow community, all kinds of folks coming in. So that's where I realized, this is more than I should be holding, right? We need to grow facilitation. And so I started my first facilitation workshop in 2017 with a few folks from this place called Tranquility Base and Karen and a couple of others. And that the workshops were going well, and we were graduating and growing facilitation slowly. And but then the whole structure of the community was becoming unwieldy. The email list was having 300-400 people on it, right? And so we got together as sort of the leadership group, and we said, what is going on? And we all realized that we had already a church, that it was an etheric body of a church. We were a community coming together, bringing resources and methods and practices together that were enabling us to experience the divine, right? And so that was sort of an etheric recognition. Then we got our friend from Shakruna together, and we started asking, what would it mean to found a church in the space, right? And And so we were able to start doing that. And COVID hit, which was actually in a way useful for us. We started meeting online frequently, and then we were working through our bylaws and all these things. And we founded the church formally in 2020. I hope that was, that's a good story there.
You mentioned COVID, and interestingly enough, for me, COVID was the moment I moved out to the countryside, which indirectly led to eventually starting the Waira retreat. So as you say, you kind of were doing stuff your life, preparing you for something. Something similar happened to me. I never planned to start an ayahuasca retreat. I just started doing ceremonies with the shaman that I knew, and slowly just grew, and I now outgrew anything I could have imagined. So COVID, I think, was this big wake-up call for a lot of people. And also, I think the trust in mainstream authority really plummeted around the COVID time, and more people started looking for alternative healing methods and plant medicines amongst them. But can you talk to us a little bit more about, let's imagine somebody's listening to this podcast and they thinking about starting their own church. What is that process like? How easy or difficult it is? Because I think in the U.S., one of the only ways to work with the medicine is to have a church.
Yeah. And this is a rich conversation for me that involves a lot of self-reflection. So I'll share my perspective, and there may be other perspectives, but I guess the first thing that I would propose, and this is why I'm trying to come into this with a humble framing, is I would not recommend founding a church if the goals of founding the church are to sell mushrooms or something like that, right? Not that selling mushrooms in itself, that may be a lovely, wonderful, I fully support, people offering mushrooms to communities. But there has been experience, people coming and meeting me, they're like, Bob, I want to deal mushrooms. Why don't I found a church? Right. And to me, that is a challenging, because I would propose to you that if you're considering founding a church, that you really want to be sincere in understanding what you mean by that, or exploring what you mean by what is founding a church, right? You spiritual but not religious in the United States is not religious, right? So you probably want to be able to think about, you can be spiritual and religious, that can help, right? But if you want to found a church, you probably need to look through that critique of the domination associated with religion. You mentioned distrust in authorities and institutions that has emerged a little bit since the early 20s. And a lot of people have a lot of distrust of religious institutions, right? Big churches and Methodist Church and Catholic Church and things like that, experiencing them as dominating, right? And really culturally dominating, not opening the way to an experience of God, but rather dominating me culturally and telling me I have to live certain ways. And, so I want to propose, if someone's opening a church, you want to think about all of those things. What do I mean by religion? What do I mean by church? Am I able to sincerely get behind that concept, right? What do I mean when I say that, right? If you're like, I just want a way to sell mushrooms without getting in trouble, that's making it more difficult for other churches that are sincere. You see what I mean? Because you're really taking advantage rather than moving from authenticity. So that's my first comment. And that's kind of a rough one. And I realize there may be critical feedback on that statement that I'm making, and so I want to be humble and reflective there, but that's my first comment. So if you feel that you have a sincere calling to engage in a religious practice, then in the United States, you just need a few things to be really clear. You need to have a well-formed doctrine or dogma. It has to be clear. Oh, that already causes trouble for me. Those word dogma, oh my gosh, no, right? Because dogma is often associated with metaphysical domination. You better believe this or you're going to go to hell, right? Now, I have a lot of trouble with that personally. So you want to think clearly about what your dogma is in order to have a shared faith within a community, which helps define a church, right? A community with a shared faith, shared values, shared practice. Can you have those things? Within Sacred Garden community, we have something we call least dogma. right? So you hear us working on this stuff. It's like, well, Sam, if we're using words, we're probably using dogma. Like just when I say hello, there are all kinds of cultural assumptions coming along with what that means, right? So I don't think we can claim no dogma within Sacred Garden Church, right? There's a church that says they're a church of no dogma. I think that's really cool. If they can do that, wonderful, right? But we at least have least dogma within Sacred Garden community. We're simply open to the possibility that the sacraments of our church, if we engage them carefully and respectfully, they can connect us to a direct experience of the divine within this lifetime. That's our shared faith. But what we mean by divine, we don't say, right? Your experience may be different. We have shared values, care, respect, integrity, and trust. We have a common practice that moves around a wheel of practice from navigation to preparation, initiation, practice, integration, community integration, right? So this guides our practice. So these are some of the things that bring us together as a community and allow us to, I think, with real sincerity and authenticity, call ourselves a church. Yeah. Does that all make a sense?
Definitely. I think what you say about dogma is really true. I think the only way to start church without dogma would be to start a silent church, no communication. If you just engage with the plants, and there's probably zero dogma. And still, you got to be careful. If you have a certain art at your walls and stuff like that, they can kind of influence people's direction. So no dogma is really, really difficult. Something as a facilitator myself is something I consciously think about a lot, as in how do you behave in such a way that you don't make people's experience about yourself, but about, the sacrament and the larger connection. And yeah, you mentioned, starting a church just to sell mushrooms. So that's not why I'm asking that for. Ayahuasca is legal here in Colombia. I'm asking because, for just out of curiosity, because it seems, when you think about church, in my opinion, it's like, wow, you started a Christianity or something like that. It's like a big thing to do. So it's like to realize that, you can start a church is a very interesting concept. But definitely I don't recommend anyone to just sell mushrooms or buy mushrooms. I think, in my opinion, it has to be done in a safe, legal setting with good facilitation, which I'm sure you're doing. So any notes about what I just said? Any ideas, thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. I just appreciated your reflection. Yeah, and I love that idea of silence. And I do identify strongly with my family's Quaker heritage. So my up to my great grandfather were Quakers, and they had that technique where they would just sort of sit silently, and then someone would just speak. And so it's lovely that you're kind of reflecting that back. I feel an alignment. And I think that there's a little bit about the sacred plant work that may help us in that direction. The sacred plants, now this is my perspective, this is just me shouting, but they don't require a whole lot of made up stuff. Like that, if you can just sit with a calm and careful and respectful way with the presence of those sacraments, they will open the way for you. They don't require me to bring a special prayer that uses only the certain words, right? And my experience, which I'm not claiming a lineage, but having been really privileged to have been able just to sort of experience different ways of sitting in different areas, a bruja ceremony in the Philippines, or, an old, small sort of daime-like group in Brazil, or a Yawanawa ceremony in Bolivia. And they can be very different. The metaphysics and the dogma, the language, they can be really different from place to place, right? But the experience of learning, of healing, of divine presence, that will move independently of those different things. This is only my experience, right? And so for me, there's something special about the sacraments of our church, because they can open the way to the divine independently of the language that I use, right? And so I think that's really rich and interesting. And may they guide us in that direction where we may not be so, again, this is not I'm not representing our church. This is just me thinking. But where we're not so hung up on our particular faith position, then we have to fight each other, right? It's like, oh no, you say Allah and I say Jesus, and so now we have to fight, right? Or you say, Wachuma, and I use a crucifix, right? And so our sacraments are different, and we have to like drive each other off of the planet that we're so upset about the difference, right? If these sacraments can help us realize maybe the words we use, the names we give, they're not so important. Maybe, right? It may be an experience that's really beyond words that it is the thing that we're seeking, right? And so I personally hope we're moving in that direction. Also, I really appreciated your comment about be careful about not sort of making it like, we're having a ceremony, so let me put my culture into the ceremony so that everyone will be more like me. That's a really subtle thing, because I'm doing that right now, even as we're talking, right? I'm saying, here's a way of thinking that may be useful, right? And sharing that. So to become really sensitive to that, I think is important, particularly with these entheogens or psychedelics, because one thing that I believe they will often do across people and across cultures and categories is they'll open us to the idea that things can be different. So we'll have an experience, and then during the experience, we'll receive so much information or so much guidance or so much whatever that may be that comes through the journey. Then during the journey, it's like you come back out and you're like, oh, everything can be really different. If someone is in there feeding you a whole bunch of cultural perspective, when you come out of that journey, they call it suggestibility, right? You may be a lot more open to hearing new ways, different ways, which is lovely. That's wonderful. But if somebody's coming in and they're saying, okay, now that you've had the mushrooms, let me tell you, the universe is all like this. There's a Trinity, or there's Brahma, or whatever it is that I want to tell you. You want to be humble about that, because your voice is probably being heard a lot more loudly. The person's opened. And so to be sensitive to avoiding manipulation, cultism, I'll call it neo-fundamentalism, right? To me, those things are really important in our space. And I think other people may have different perspectives. They may think it's really important that my metaphysics is really heard. And I'm not going to tell them that they're wrong, but for me, I think it's important not to be trying to manipulate people out of entheogen journeys into my metaphysics, right? Yeah.
Thank you. It's all very, very, very good information. I'm sure the listeners are enjoying it. Once I had an experience in Colombia and Amazon where medicine showed me a potential for me to become a healer, not as in a shaman, but like heal people with my hands, like in a one-on-one kind of situation. They kind of gave me the entire manual, and I came out appalled after that. Didn't know what to do with it. So I asked many shamans, do you know somebody who can teach me? Do you know what should I do about it? And almost all of them said just this one thing, keep drinking the medicine, and we'll tell you what you need to do. So in a way, there's this unique ability that there's this one clear source that cannot be polluted, and that's the medicines themselves, or as you call them, sacraments. And interestingly enough, you mentioned cultism and cults. So my question to you is, have you ever been accused? Because religion plus psychedelics, I can see a lot of people wanting to use that word. Have anyone ever said like, oh, it's just you just have a cult? And like, what would you say to somebody like that?
Right. Kind of interestingly, here's another issue that I'll bring up, speaking of being accused of. So I'm really thankful for Sacred Garden community. We have a very, we're sort of exploring this holacracy model for our leadership. We're very clear that the experience and the healing and the relationship is between the practitioner and the sacrament, and the practitioner is every member of our community. It's not that there's only a priest who is the practitioner. You see what I mean? And everyone else is like a patient. Every person in our community is a practitioner. So we really want to recognize the leadership, the agency of every member of our community. So all this is really baked in to the community. Also, this least dogma as a part of our community. All of these things make it less likely for people to see us as a cult. You see what I mean? There's not a infinitely wise priest who's a member of an eternal lineage or something like that in our community. We recognize that we've come together as a community with these sacraments because we've experienced their healing. It's not that I am the only one who's experienced that healing. Many members of our community have experienced divine presence with the sacraments. You see what I mean? So there's not a special priest who knows more than anyone else here. I happen to be a little bit older than a lot of folks. I've been working with sacred plants for many years, so I can give plant talks that people love and talk all about the different plants. And I've had a good bit of experience in the space, in the presence of the sacraments, so I can help people understand their experiences some. But I'm no different than anyone else. I'm just another person who just happens to be a little older and has maybe had a little bit more experience. I'll share that experience. You can share yours with me, please, and I can learn, right? We consider ourselves to be a continually learning community because we have least dogma. We don't already know everything, right? And so we learn from each other. All of these help protect us from cultism. And then there are real specific things like I don't have perfect power. We have a board and we have checks and balances. And we have ethics councils. You see what I mean? We have other stewardship. I don't get to just appoint all of the team. We have to let the community give thumbs up or down on new team members. All of these things we do to avoid being a cult, right? So I think having transparency, avoiding the priestly, like making the Taita or the Onanya or the curandero or the shaman, as some special being who's really separate and different from the others. We don't do that here, right? And so this is also part of the reason why I'll say we're a transmodern or a positive postmodern church. We don't even come from a master lineage, right? A lot of churches will say, oh, we come from a certain special Shipibo lineage from Peru. That's wonderful. That's, if you have that, that's wonderful for you. That may, that there may be some obscure esoteric knowledge that is associated with the priestly wisdom of that tradition. And that may be useful for that group. That could also be tending a little bit more towards what someone might call cultish if there's a lineage that really venerates its historical masters. You see what I mean? They're special somehow. We don't have that here. We're just a regular group of people who grew up mostly from the West, and we realized through LSD and MDMA and others, Changa and the psilocybin mushrooms, particularly cubensis and natalensis, that these can be sacraments, and together we're founding this community, right? To me, that's very different from a cult. Can you see that?
Yeah, no, I definitely see that, and I would never accuse you for being a cult. It's just, since you mentioned that word, it's something that I think about a lot. And yeah, because obviously, on the internet, you get accused of everything. If you promote ayahuasca, they say, you're just a glorified drug smuggler or lord, whatever, or you're comment that I commonly get is like, stop drugging people, or like only Jesus can save you, and those kinds of things. So I'm assuming you must have a similar kind of experience. And yeah, I think the beauty of medicines, once again, is by removing the intermediary between a sacrament and a person, you lower the risks of all of those negative consequences, cultism included. Because if you have in the past, what church wanted us to believe is like, there was this person thousands of years ago, he had a sacrament, he wrote a book about it, now you have to believe it. And I was like, you don't need a book. As long as you have the sacrament, that's pretty clear. And I believe this is kind of what you're doing. Hopefully I'm not putting words in your mouth.
I love that conversation, and I'm going to share this for the Christians that might be seeing this, or people who have some Christian heritage. I did kind of appreciate this old Christian character named Martin Luther. He was this guy who basically said, hey, we don't have to have a priest. If you have a Bible, you can read the Bible yourself, right? And you can find your own wisdom from the Bible without the priest. And that he founded like the Methodist Church and some of these churches, maybe Lutheran, I don't know exactly, but they split off from the Catholic Church. Martin Luther did. So, and that whole movement was to say, we don't have to go through the priest for our sacrament. And I thought that was really profound. And I think this is a movement even further in that direction. We don't even need the Bible that was written by someone who had that experience, right, to find our wisdom. We can have that experience directly of God or of the divine or of the healing wisdom of the universe, whatever language we want to use. And so this to me is really a movement even in the tradition of Luther, right? Because we're growing closer to God as people rather than as priests. And I think that's really powerful and positive and hopeful. And there are also some interesting challenges, because if you don't do the control strategy that says you have to go to the priest, well, then that makes it harder to maintain your institution, right? So there's a real sort of power-driven temptation to say, you got to come to the church and you got to sit in the ceremony with us, with our facilitator, or you're not going to see God, right? But that's probably maybe just trying to sort of create power and maintain a position rather than growing divine presence. So within Sacred Garden community, we offer facilitated ceremonies. We love them. We believe that they're safer. They're really good for newcomers. But we're not telling people that they can't, have the journey at home with a sitter nearby or something like that, right? So we're moving in that direction. Also, really quickly, that experience, and I'll say this for folks who are considering founding a church, particularly if it becomes very known, but even within your own congregation, there is a lot of opportunity for these experiences of things like projection and transference and all that. You were mentioning your experience on the internet with people sort of giving you a lot of different, I'll say, sort of challenges that they're bringing up. So, there'll be people who will see me as this really wise savior type, and they'll be disappointed after a little while, because I'm just a regular person. I have moods, I have temper, you know what I mean? And so people will become really disillusioned. They think that you're this wise. But then also there was, someone will say, oh, he's a global capitalist who's partnering with big pharma to corner the mushroom market. Just projection will happen when you get it. That's not true, by the way. I'll state, I have no global pharma and certainly no interest in patenting psilocybin. But those kind of things will come to you if you're in a leadership role in a religious institution, because I think people have a lot of confusion and fear and anger. And if you kind of are perceived as a leader or even particularly as a religious or spiritual leader, you can receive a lot of interpretations about who you are that, the person doesn't even know you, that they've never met you, but they just see you and then they imagine all these things. So you need to be kind of aware of that and be effective at setting self-boundaries and emotional boundaries and things if you're planning on founding a church. Yeah.
Yeah, those are all very valuable insights. Projection is something I have experienced firsthand many times, not only in interacting with people on the internet, but sometimes in the work with the medicine, a lot of stuff starts coming up and sometimes it's projected on you, especially if you're a certain kind of character. Whether you want it or not, it's a part of it. So it's great to I have quite a few podcast episodes talking about the transference, counter transference, and all the niceties of that work. And answering my previous questions, you mentioned ethics, and I believe you focus a lot on ethics and cultural respect. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What is your approach?
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you. There's intuition, and then you'll talk, and then you'll learn. So it's like when we were creating our wheel of practice, we include community integration as a part of the wheel of practice. And so sometimes during Sunday service, I'll mention that community integration in many ways is where you might say the rubber hits the road, or, where you really got to walk the walk. And, sitting in ceremony can be challenging. Challenging experiences can emerge. Shame, anger, fear, those things can happen in ceremony. You can move through them. The same things will happen in community, right? And particularly when you have a community like ours, which shares least dogma, where we want to be radically inclusive, right? Because we share least dogma. We're not telling you have to believe one thing or another. Everyone is welcome, right? But then we get diverse cultures coming in the door. We get diverse skin colors, diverse gender orientations, or sex and gender kind of orientations. We'll get different metaphysical backgrounds. Like there would be someone who would come in from a very conservative background who may be very offended when they learned that 3 or 4 men were naked in a hot tub together after a ceremony. No women present, but these men were naked, right? And from that person, from their culture, that may be very offensive. Like I thought it was a safe church, but now I realize that you all are supporting nudity. Well, so the other culture is like, what are you talking about? Anyone can get together and have a hot tub. There's nothing unsafe about people, right? So we have different cultures coming into the church, and then they can become upset with each other, right? Because you're doing things wrong. Well, from that culture, it's perfectly fine. From the other culture, it's really, really dangerous or wrong. So we have to grow that kind of insight that we live in this diverse world. And so the actual practice of community integration has really been tempering for me, to experience all of the diversity and the fear and the anger and the experience of not being safe, right? When you have diversity, so particularly in a nation like the United States, where there's some really hard breaks between, for example, people who are primarily white identified or identified as Black, right? That the level of fear and distrust between those groups can be very difficult and can emerge in community, right? And so if someone wants to say, hey, I just don't feel this is safe for me, I can't say I know it is really safe, because it's you who are present. And if you're in a place where everyone is like a demon around you, it may not be safe for you or the other person, right? So these conditions of potential, at least perceived or real harm, they can just emerge out of the presence of difference in community, right? And so as a result of this, when we really started growing quickly, that was hard. Been hard. We've had people come into community and not feel safe. Everyone sitting feels like they're being fine, right? But we can have these but then maybe someone is really harmed. So all these things can happen, right? As a result, I'm so thankful. Some of the community at Sacred Garden have helped us put together really robust ethics programs. In the beginning, everyone was just coming to me. Bob, I don't feel safe. This person said something, and and I found myself triangulating frequently, trying to help solve between two people who I didn't really know the detail, but trying, and that doesn't work. I would recommend to avoid being the one who solves everybody's ruptures, right? And triangulating. So that was all of 6 months with people coming to me just to solve their challenges. And then we have a community member who's had a lot of experience in a different community. And so he helped Sacred Garden put together a real process. So we have a listening function first, someone who's just there to listen in a non-judgmental way. Karen does a wonderful job with that. Then we have a harmony circle that people can go to. We call it a peacemaking circle. That's grounded in at least what are called a lot of Native American practices, right? That are intending to allow people to be heard if they're not feeling safe or need to be heard in a safe way, right? And then finally, if we can't move through those things, then we have an ethics council. That is where things get a little rough. People need to make a formal ethics complaint. It becomes more like a adjudicatory. We have to review it, and everything goes into confidentiality, and all these things happen. That's really rough. And we've had a few ethics submissions and had to move through ethics processes, right, over the years. Last thing I'm going to say on this is I'm also very thankful to the Sacred Plant Alliance I mentioned, which was incubated by that group, Shakruna, but it's its own group now, that it provides external ethical oversight and expectations to Sacred Garden and to a number of other churches. I think it's more than 20 now. So if we have an ethics issue that rises to that ethics complaint level, then we are compelled to share that with the Sacred Plant Alliance, right? To make sure that we're not being corrupt. Like maybe protecting the facilitator who was accused of some boundary violation or something. It's maybe tempting for groups to kind of protect their leadership because they want the group to persist, and they've got some leader that they've invested in, right? And so having external ethics body that keeps us accountable, not only to our internal community, but also to external, that's very useful for us, just to keep us honest. So there's a little information about ethics.
That's not little. I think that's a lot of information, and it's great how much attention you pay to that, because let's compare it to conventional church. There's, especially Catholic Church doesn't have a good reputation. There's a lot of things they just sweep under the rug. So it would be great if they also had some kind of external oversight. It's interesting. You mentioned naked people in the jacuzzi. For those who are very afraid of that, definitely don't go to some parts of Europe, because everyone goes to sauna naked together. I once I built a sauna in one of the previous houses I lived in, and I had a German friend visit me, and he came in the sauna naked, and he came out of sauna naked. My wife saw him, and she was really, really upset. So I understand that managing this different culture is difficult, especially so in U.S. I think U.S. now feels very, very tense, and there's a lot of cultural trends that maybe are aimed in the opposite direction of resolution, like this whole trigger culture, which reminds me of this. I interviewed a lady a few episodes before, and she said, I'm not a gun. I don't have a trigger." I think that's something more people need to know about. But yeah, people come to Lawara to drink ayahuasca, and most of them aim at healing. Some people kind of aim at maybe some personal growth. What do people seek when they join your church?
Right. Yes. So we have our explicit mission and vision, and then we have the reality too. So explicitly, by our mission and vision and our dogma, we're not intending to offer Sacred Garden community, like our dogma doesn't say we will heal you of your injuries. That's not in our core dogma. You see what I mean? Our core dogma is you can experience divine presence. We're open to that possibility. And the experience of divine presence, I will propose to you, is deeply healing, the experience of the divine, that mystical experience that can occur within the sacrament is deeply healing of all kinds of fear, anger, shame, alienation, anxiety. Many of these things will be healed by divine presence, in my opinion, or can be helped deeply. But Sacred Garden community is really, we're not saying, please come to us with your physical or emotional or mental illness and we will solve that. The sacraments or our practices will heal you of those things. We're not saying that. In fact, we have a health and suitability screening process, right? So people spend time with us, get to know us. We ask new members to spend at least 3 months and attend at least 8 events before you become confirmed, right? Before you say, yes, I understand the faith and I agree and I want to be a practitioner. After you become confirmed, you become a practitioner. To become a practitioner, we have to move you through a health and suitability. So we have a clinically trained psychologist who does interview of the questionnaire you fill in, and we have a medical review, right? And some folks may have a lot of recent hard trauma, or they may be experiencing what you could call emergence or psychosis, right? Delusional experience. They're having a lot of mental challenges that may be making it difficult for them to sort of participate in day-to-day reality. Angry, upset, having been deeply hurt, these things. If we meet someone who's in that space, we love them, we welcome them into community, but we may encourage some of those folks to do one-on-one work. You see what I mean? So if you're seeking like mental healing of mental health within Sacred Garden community, we would say that's wonderful. It's possible that these sacraments may help you, but you may actually want a more medical framework. In other words, you may want to go see a therapist that offers entheogens or whatever that may be. You see what I mean? So within Sacred Garden, we're not claiming to be the group that is healing your physical or mental illnesses. We may, the practice, I believe, will help remove things that are blocking you from divine presence. And many of the things that may block us from divine presence might be called like mental health issues from another perspective, like addiction, or just anger, or shame, or resentment, or having been triggered all the time and never being able to sit in a community and be friendly. Those things may be blocking us from divine presence, and the practice may help remove those. So that may be healing in itself, but that's not what we're trying to do. That's not our goal. Isn't to heal you of your sickness. Rather, it's to help you move into divine presence where all things are healed, where all diseases are known and all diseases are healed. And honestly, then the disease it becomes not even important. It's almost as if everything becomes a gift of being, right? So that's a little framing there.
That makes a lot of sense. Gave me some clarity on what you're doing. Yeah, we're also very careful with who we receive and not receive, because there are some things with, unfortunately, medicine cannot be compatible with. Last question I have for you before we wrap up is Decriminalize Nature. Can you tell us a little bit about that movement?
Yeah, and boy, it's became much bigger than me. And so if you want to talk about inflation and non-inflation, this is one that helps me be humble. Sometimes if I want to be a little puffy, Albert Hoffman wrote a book called LSD, My Problem Child. And, I'm not in the category of Albert Hoffman, but sometimes I might almost say Decrim Nature, My Problem Child a little bit. So I was the founding chairperson of Decrim Nature here in Oakland, California, of Decrim Nature Oakland. So that was the first Decrim Nature, all plants and fungi, and the compounds that may be found within them removed to lowest priority for law enforcement, right? That was actually 3 of the 5 board were Sacred Garden community members, and I was the chair. So it was really a Sacred Garden community movement. It was a little different than I feel Decrim Nature became. From Oakland, this was like a quiet prayer for integrity with the city. Like, for some reason, I'd been having a number of practices where I would be sitting in meditation, and this is unusual for me, Sam. It doesn't normally happen, where towards the end of the meditation, these really clear words would come into my head as if they were coming from somewhere else, right? And they were saying, you can sit with the elders of your village. And here I am in Oakland, downtown Oakland. I'm like, this isn't really a village, and I don't know who the elders are. What in the world does that mean? Right? And I was just like, who am I supposed to sit with the elders of my village? But then I was giving a lot of plant talks. This was back in 2018, 19, I think. And this cat, Carlos Plazola, came to one of my plant talks, and he had been the chief of staff for a city council member, and he'd been still is a real estate developer. So he put big developments in all kinds of districts around the city, and he knew all the city council, right? He came to one of my plant talks. After the plant talk, I'll make the story short, but there's a lot more, but to spare. He basically was like, hey, I can get you a sit down with city council members if you'd like pretty much any of them. Then a little bell went on in my head, which was like, oh, this is sitting with the elders of your village, right? And so I was considering the city council as elders in a sincere way, like as elders of this village. And then there was some other motivations, which we have like 80-year-old members in this community. One who has since passed would occasionally get dizzy and sort of pass out with cannabis, even when we're just having community events. This guy who was kind of in his mid-80s was fragile. And so I really felt like I needed to be able to call 911 without being afraid and putting all the altar away and, all that. So there was this desire to grow safety, to grow integrity with the elders of our village, just to be honest with our practice. That was really guiding me and the Sacred Garden leadership into the Decrim movement. And the city council of Oakland really, I believe, heard that. In fact, they even said, you all came to us with such a respectful approach. We thought maybe you're going to be trying to burn everything down or like be a bunch of really upset activists, but you just came in this really loving and respectful way, and we really appreciate that. And it was unanimous, so it was just like an answered prayer. The whole decrim in Oakland was just such a beautiful, flowing movement. And I want to give Carlos and then Larry Norris, the two non-SGC members, a lot of credit. They came in hard with social media and organizing, and clipboards and all this, right? Sacred Garden was more prayer and sincerity. These other guys were like activist energy, so 5 board members, 2 non-SGC, and then Carlos and Larry were the 2 non-SGC. Very active. After we made the resolution in Oakland, Carlos and Larry felt a very strong and expansive, let's go national, and all that. For the Sacred Garden community, that was a total surprise, because we're just asking the elders of our village for integrity and safety. We're not a political action group trying to save the world or something, right? We just want to have safe, quiet practice here in Oakland without being burdened. And so Carlos in particular, but also Larry, have a much more sort of politicized, the kind of far left wing, a lot of challenges with the pharmaceutical, anti-pharma, a different energy, like a real hard activist energy. You see what I mean? So we started kind of, after the Oakland happened, they really wanted to go in this aggressive activist kind of direction. And the Sacred Garden community just basically resigned from the board. And Decrim Nature is still going on. I think Carlos has actually now left Decrim Nature as well. And I'm really thankful for its good work. But it's taken a much more, it varies from city to city. Decrim Nature are kind of city, county led, right? But it's gotten a lot more political, a lot more sort of divided politically. And that's okay. But it's just been interesting how that evolved. Carlos really wanted to come in and take leadership, and I thought that was fine. And so I let go of the Decrim leadership in, I think, 2020, maybe it was. Yeah.
Interesting. It's good. I guess it's a good, wise decision, because there's a phrase I've heard somewhere that revolution always eats its children, something like that. So it's like when you're in this big change, then inevitably you kind of get sucked by this wave. I don't know if it makes any sense. Bob, thank you so much for this episode. It was really informative, very educational, very entertaining. Where can people find more about yourself if they want to find you on social media, or maybe join your church if they're in the Oakland area?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Sam, and thank you for this time. I've really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit too. Yeah, thank you for this time. And if folks want to get to know us better, it's easy. You can go to Sacred Garden. That's just one word, sacredgarden.life. So sacredgarden.life online. And then you'll find everything you need to find. If you put your email in the list, we keep it confidential. We are a sincere church. Our practice is legally defended. So, we're practicing within, we assert, and our attorneys, that we're practicing within the laws. We're very high standard and careful. We keep you confidential. But if you want to put your email in the website, you'll start getting a newsletter twice a month, and invitations to different events like book club and Sunday service and things like that. So check out sacredgarden.life and put your email in, and we'll be cooking.
Great. Before we wrap up, I wanted to thank Madhu. Madhu is a volunteer here at Lawira. He came a bit more than a year ago as a patient, really loved it. Now he came back. He's here doing good work, and he's also a member of your church, and he put us together for this conversation. So, Madhu, if you're listening, you are appreciated.
Thank you, Madhu. Love you, brother.
Thank you, Bob. Great episode. Guys, you've been listening to Ayahuasca Podcast. As always, with you, host Sam Believ. It was a pleasure, and I will see you in the next episode.
Thank you, Sam. Big love.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to support us and psychedelic renaissance at large, please follow us and leave us a like wherever it is you're listening. Share this episode with someone who will benefit from this information. Nothing in this podcast is intended as medical advice, and it is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This episode is sponsored by Lawira Ayahuasca Retreat. At La Huayra, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. La Huayra, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you.
Con la vida, vida de la baila, cura con la guaira, limpia, limpia, taita, vibrando con la guaira.